My heart got drop-kicked into next Tuesday by a bank alert that made my blood turn to ice water. But let me back up, because this story starts like every other train wreck, with me being a complete idiot who trusted the wrong person. It was Tuesday morning, and everything felt stupidly normal. I'm talking aggressively mundane here, the kind of morning where you're half asleep, shuffling around in your boxers, wondering if that milk in the fridge is still good or if it's evolved into a new life form. I was doing my usual routine, checking emails that could have been texts, burning toast, because I'm apparently incapable of mastering basic kitchen appliances, and listening to my wife Tara clatter around upstairs like she was wrestling a suitcase into submission. "Babe, I'm heading out for that client meeting in New York," she hollered down the stairs, and I gave her the standard husband grunt of acknowledgement. You know the one. It's somewhere between okay and I'm not actually listening, but I heard noise, so I'm responding. She'd been talking about this meeting for weeks, some big shot client who wanted to discuss expanding their marketing budget. Tara worked in advertising, and she was always jetting off to schmooze with people who had more money than sense. I heard her heels clicking across the hardwood, the front door slamming, and then silence. Just me, my burnt toast, and the lingering smell of her perfume. That expensive stuff she bought that probably cost more than my car payment. I should have known something was off right then, because Tara never left without giving me a detailed rundown of her schedule, complete with backup contacts and emergency numbers. But hey, hindsight's 2020, and apparently my foresight was legally blind. The morning dragged on like a Monday staff meeting. I managed to salvage breakfast, answered some emails from clients who seemed to think graphic design was magic that happened overnight, and was just settling into my home office when my phone buzzed. Bank alert. You know that little spike of anxiety you get when you see those notifications? Like maybe you forgot about some automatic payment, and now you're overdrawn? Yeah, multiply that by about 1,000. But this wasn't about my account. This was about my mom's retirement fund, the one she'd been building for 30 years, penny by penny, coupon by coupon, working double shifts at the library, and saving every spare dollar like her life depended on it. The alert was telling me that someone had just withdrawn $120,000. The entire account. Gone. Vanished. Poof. I stared at my phone screen until my eyes started to water, hoping the numbers would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But nope. There it was in cold, digital black and white. $120,000, transferred out at 10:47 a.m. And the authorized user? Tara Michelle Henderson Brooks. My loving wife, who'd helped my mom set up online banking last year because mom was too old-fashioned to figure out all that computer nonsense. My hands started shaking like I was trying to text during an earthquake. I called Tara's number, and it went straight to voicemail. That cheerful little message she'd recorded. "Hi, you've reached Tara. I'm probably helping a client create something amazing, so leave a message and I'll get back to you." I wanted to throw my phone across the room and watch it explode into 1,000 pieces. Instead, I tried calling again. Straight to voicemail. Again. Same result. By the fourth attempt, I was pretty sure she'd either dropped her phone in the Hudson River or was ignoring me on purpose. Given the circumstances, I was betting on the latter. That's when the panic really set in. I bolted upstairs to our bedroom, taking the steps 3 at a time like the house was on fire. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she'd left a note, or maybe she was planning to surprise mom with some kind of investment opportunity. Maybe unicorns were real and Santa Claus was going to fix everything with his magic sleigh. But when I burst into our bedroom, reality hit me like a brick wall covered in broken glass and disappointment. Her suitcase, the big one she used for week-long trips, was gone. The dresser drawers were hanging open like gaping mouths, half empty. Her jewelry box was missing the good stuff, the pieces her grandmother had left her. Even her favorite pillow was gone, which was weird because Tara complained about hotel pillows like they were personally designed to ruin her life. I stood there in our bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of her systematic departure, and felt something inside me just break. Not like a dramatic movie break, with violins and slow-motion tears. More like when you drop your phone and the screen spiders into a million tiny cracks, still functional, but permanently damaged. She hadn't just stolen my mom's retirement money. She'd planned this. She'd been planning it while kissing me goodbye in the mornings, while asking about my day over dinner, while lying next to me in bed talking about our future together. Every conversation, every moment of intimacy, Every time she'd said, "I love you," it had all been a lie wrapped in a performance worthy of an Oscar. I sank down onto our bed. Well, my bed now, I guess, and tried to process what this meant. My 60-year-old mother, who'd worked her ass off for 3 decades, who clipped coupons and bought generic cereal and drove a car older than some of my coworkers, had just lost everything. Her security, her peace of mind, her ability to retire with dignity. Also, my wife could fund whatever midlife crisis she was having. The worst part? I'd trusted Tara with Mom's financial information. I'd vouched for her, told Mom she was family, that she'd never hurt us. I might as well have handed a loaded gun to someone and been surprised when they pulled the trigger. The guilt was already starting to eat me alive, gnawing at my insides like some kind of parasitic shame monster. I needed to tell Mom what happened, but how do you make that phone call? "Hey, remember how you trusted my wife with your life savings?" Yeah, funny story. There was no good way to deliver news like that. It was like trying to gift wrap a grenade. No matter how pretty you made the packaging, it was still going to explode and ruin everyone's day. But Mom deserved to know. She deserved to understand why her golden years had just turned into a financial nightmare, courtesy of her son's spectacularly poor judgment in women. So I grabbed my keys, headed for the door, and tried to figure out how to explain to my mother that I'd failed her in the most fundamental way possible. Little did I know that Mom was way ahead of me, and she was about to teach everyone involved a lesson they'd never forget. The drive to Mom's house felt like traveling through some kind of alternate dimension where everything looked normal, but nothing made sense anymore. Traffic lights still worked, people still walked their dogs, kids still rode bikes down the sidewalk, but my entire reality had shifted sideways, and I was pretty sure I was having what the internet would call a complete mental breakdown. If this was happening to someone else's life that I was watching on social media, my hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel. Every red light gave me more time to spiral into worst-case scenarios. And let me tell you, my brain was working overtime in the catastrophe department. I kept imagining Mom's face when I told her the news, how her smile would crumble, how she'd probably try to comfort me even though I was the one delivering the death blow to her financial security. Because that's the kind of woman she is. The kind who apologizes when other people step on her feet. I pulled into her driveway and just sat there for a minute, staring at the house I grew up in. Same yellow shutters she'd painted herself last spring. Same garden gnome collection that I'd been making fun of for 15 years. Same front porch where she still put out decorations for every holiday, like she was running a one-woman welcome committee for the neighborhood. It looked so normal, so peaceful, so completely unaware that its owner's life was about to get nuked from orbit. The worst part was knowing I had to be the one to drop this bomb. I was about to walk into that house and destroy the woman who'd raised me, who'd worked double shifts to pay for my college, who still sent me care packages with homemade cookies and notes that said, "Just because." I was going to have to look her in the eye and tell her that her trust in me, and by extension, my wife, had cost her everything. But here's the thing about putting off terrible conversations. They don't get easier with time. They just get worse, like leaving dishes in the sink until they develop their own ecosystem. So I dragged myself out of the car, walked up the familiar path, and rang the doorbell like I was announcing the arrival of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Mom opened the door with that smile that could probably cure depression if someone figured out how to bottle it. She was wearing her favorite cardigan, the blue one with the tiny holes that she refused to throw away because Dad had complimented it once, and holding a dish towel like she'd been in the middle of cleaning something that was already spotless. "Julian, what a wonderful surprise." She stepped back to let me in, already heading toward the kitchen because in Mom's world, every problem could be improved with the right snacks. "I was just making some tea. You look stressed, sweetheart. Rough day at work." And that's when I completely lost it. Not in a dramatic, throwing myself on the floor kind of way, but in that quiet, devastating way where you realize you're about to break someone's heart and there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. I followed her into the kitchen, trying to find words that didn't exist for this situation. "Mom, we need to talk." My voice sounded like I'd been gargling gravel and disappointment. "It's about Tara and your retirement account." She paused in the middle of pulling mugs from the cabinet, and I saw her shoulders tense slightly. But she didn't turn around. Just kept moving with that determined efficiency she'd perfected over decades of dealing with life's curveballs. "Oh," she said, and her tone was so carefully neutral it made my stomach clench. What about it? So I told her. Everything. The bank alert, the missing $120,000, Tara's disappearance, the empty drawers, and missing suitcase. I word vomited the entire nightmare while she stood at the counter with her back to me, making tea like nothing had changed. I kept waiting for her to break down, to start crying, to ask me how this could have happened. But she just listened. When I finished talking, she finally turned around, carrying 2 steaming mugs, and wearing an expression I couldn't read. She set the tea down on her little kitchen table, the same one where she'd helped me with homework and listened to me complain about teenage problems that seemed earth-shattering at the time, but were actually just dress rehearsals for this moment. I see, she said calmly, settling into her chair like we were discussing the weather or her neighbor's new fence. And you checked the credit card statements? I nodded, pulling up the information on my phone with hands that were still doing their impression of earthquake victims. She bought plane tickets to Miami. First class. Charged about $3,000 at some fancy resort, another $2,000 at designer stores. And get this, she wasn't alone. Mom raised an eyebrow, sipping her tea like she was watching a mildly interesting documentary instead of learning that her life savings had been stolen by her daughter-in-law. There's a guy. I continued, feeling like I was confessing to crimes I hadn't committed. Brandon Cole. Looks like they've been planning this for weeks, maybe months. I found hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, even some kind of couple's massage package. The last part came out bitter enough to curdle milk. She used your retirement fund to finance a romantic getaway with her side piece. I expected outrage. I expected tears. Hell, I would have settled for some good old-fashioned screaming about what a failure I was as a son and a husband. Instead, Mom just nodded thoughtfully, like I'd just explained why the grocery store was out of her favorite brand of crackers. Well, she said finally, that's certainly something. I stared at her, wondering if she was having some kind of delayed shock reaction. Mom, did you hear what I said? She stole everything. Your entire retirement. The money you've been saving for 30 years. You're 60 years old, and your daughter-in-law just financially ruined you. She looked at me over her tea mug, and for just a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not the devastation I'd expected, but something else. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Oh, I heard you, sweetheart, she said softly. I heard every word. The silence stretched between us like a loaded gun. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for reality to hit her, for the breakdown that had to be coming. But Mom just sat there, drinking her tea with the same calm she'd shown when I was 8, and had broken her favorite lamp playing indoor baseball. Aren't you? I mean, don't you want to call the police? Or the bank? We need to do something, Mom. We can't just sit here drinking tea while she's living it up in Miami on your dime. She set down her mug and reached across the table to pat my hand. Her touch was warm and steady, completely at odds with the chaos spinning through my brain. Julian, she said, and her voice had that particular tone she used when she was about to explain something important. I need you to trust me on this. Can you do that? I wanted to argue. I wanted to shake her and demand that she react like a normal person whose life had just been destroyed. But this was my mom, and she'd never steered me wrong before. Even when her advice seemed crazy, like when she told me to take that unpaid internship that led to my current career, or when she suggested I wait before proposing to Tara because something seemed off, she'd always known what she was talking about. So I nodded, even though every instinct I had was screaming that we needed to take action, needed to fight back, needed to do something other than sit in her kitchen pretending everything was fine. Good, she said, smiling that mysterious little smile again. Now, I want you to go home, get some rest, and don't worry about this anymore. I'll handle everything. But Mom, Julian, the steel in her voice could have cut glass. Trust me. And that's how I found myself walking back to my car, completely confused and more worried than ever. Because the woman who'd just calmly accepted the news that her daughter-in-law had stolen her life savings wasn't acting like the gentle, soft-spoken mother I thought I knew. She was acting like someone with a plan. I should have realized right then that Tara had made the biggest mistake of her pathetic, scheming life. She'd messed with the wrong mom. I spent the next 2 days in a state that I can only describe as aggressively confused. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and the protagonist keeps walking toward the obviously dangerous basement? That was me, Except instead of a creepy basement, I was staring at my phone every 30 seconds, waiting for some kind of apocalyptic update about Mom's financial situation. But nothing came. No panicked calls about bounced checks, no visits from debt collectors, no emergency family meetings about how we were going to figure this mess out. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if you imagine the whole thing, except you can't forget it because your wife is still missing and your marriage is deader than a Windows 95 computer. I'd been camping out in what used to be our living room, but was now just the room where I sat around feeling sorry for myself and eating cereal for dinner. The couch had become my new best friend, mainly because it didn't judge me for wearing the same pajama pants 3 days in a row or for having what could generously be called a breakdown beard growing on my face. Every time I tried to call Mom to check on her, she answered with that same eerily calm voice and told me she was doing just fine, sweetheart, before changing the subject to something completely normal, like whether I was eating enough vegetables or if I'd remembered to water that plant she'd given me for my birthday. The plant that was definitely dead, by the way, because apparently I couldn't be trusted with anything that required basic care and attention. I tried to convince myself that maybe she was in denial, that the shock hadn't hit her yet, and she was operating on some kind of emotional autopilot. People process trauma differently, right? Maybe this was just her way of coping with having her entire future stolen by a woman she'd welcomed into our family, like the daughter she never had. But deep down, I knew better. This was the same woman who'd once spent 3 weeks planning the perfect revenge against our neighbor Mrs. Patterson after she complained about Mom's unsightly garden gnomes to the homeowners association. Mom had systematically planted the most obnoxiously colorful flowers she could find right along their property line, creating what she cheerfully called her spite garden. Mrs. Patterson never complained about anything again, so when Mom told me she'd handle everything, I should have known she meant it literally. But I was too caught up in my own misery to connect the dots. Wednesday morning, I was in the middle of my new routine, which consisted of staring at the ceiling, questioning every life choice I'd ever made, and wondering if it was too late to fake my own death and start over as a sheep farmer in New Zealand, when my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach drop into my shoes. Tara, the woman who'd been radio silent for 3 days while presumably living her best life on my mother's dime. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out over self-preservation. Plus, I figured I deserved the chance to tell her exactly what I thought of her and her grand theft retirement fund. What? I answered, going for maximum hostility right out of the gate. Julian. Her voice was shrill, panicked, completely different from the confident tone she'd used when telling me about her business trip. Oh my God, Julian, you have to help me. I blinked at my phone, wondering if this was some kind of joke. Help you? Are you completely out of your mind? You stole my mother's retirement money and ran off with your boyfriend to play house in Miami. The only thing I want to help you with is finding a good lawyer, because you're going to need one. No, you don't understand. She was crying now, ugly sobbing that would have made me feel sorry for her if she hadn't, destroyed my family. Something's wrong. Everything's frozen. Our credit cards, our bank accounts, even Brandon's crypto wallet. The hotel kicked us out this morning because our card got declined, and now Brandon's gone. I sat up straighter on the couch, suddenly very interested in this conversation. What do you mean, gone? He just disappeared. Left me at the hotel with nothing. Julian, I'm stranded here with no money, no cards, and nowhere to go. Her voice cracked like she was auditioning for the world's least sympathetic tragedy. I tried to use the emergency credit card, but it's been canceled. Even my phone's about to get cut off because the automatic payment didn't go through. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile I'd had in days. Gee, Tara, that sounds awful. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to steal from a 60-year-old woman. This isn't a joke. Someone's doing this on purpose. Your mother. I know she did something. This can't be a coincidence. And that's when it hit me. The calm demeanor, the mysterious confidence, the way Mom had told me to trust her and not worry about anything. She hadn't been in denial or shock. She'd been planning. While I was spiraling into depression and self-pity, Mom had been playing chess, and Tara had just realized she was nothing but a pawn. You know what, Tara? I said, leaning back into the couch cushions and enjoying this conversation for the first time. You're absolutely right. This isn't a coincidence. And if my mother had anything to do with your current situation, then I'd say you're getting exactly what you deserve. You can't be serious. You're going to let your mother destroy me. I laughed, actually laughed, for the first time since this whole nightmare started. Destroy you? Sweetheart, you destroyed yourself the minute you decided to steal from my family. Mom's just making sure you face the consequences. The line went quiet except for her sniffling, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to manipulate me into helping her. But I was done being manipulated. Done being the nice guy who gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. Done pretending that people who hurt my family deserve my sympathy. Julian, please, she whispered, going for the pitiful approach. I know I made mistakes, but I never meant for things to go this far. Brandon told me it was just temporary, that we'd pay everything back once his business deal went through. Stop. I cut her off before she could spin another web of lies. Just stop. You didn't make mistakes, Tara. You made choices. You chose to steal from my mother. You chose to run away with some loser instead of talking to me about whatever problems we had. You chose to betray the people who loved and trusted you. So don't you dare try to blame this on anyone else. But what am I supposed to do? I have nothing. I'm stuck in Miami with no money and no way home. Figure it out, I said, and I meant it. You're a grown woman who's apparently smart enough to plan elaborate financial theft. I'm sure you'll think of something. I was about to hang up when she played her last card. Julian, I love you. I know I screwed up, but we can fix this. We can work through it together. Don't let your mother come between us. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, even after everything she'd done, she was trying to make this about Mom being the villain. Like she was the victim here, and not the woman whose life savings had been stolen to fund this disaster. You want to know what's funny? I said, standing up and walking to the window. For 3 days, I've been beating myself up about this. Wondering how I missed the signs, how I could have prevented this, how I failed as a son and a husband. But you know what I realize now? She didn't answer, but I could hear her breathing. I didn't fail at anything. I just trusted the wrong person. And lucky for me, I have a mother who's apparently a lot smarter and tougher than either of us gave her credit for. Julian, have a nice life, Tara. Or don't. Frankly, I don't give a damn anymore. I hung up and immediately called Mom. She answered on the second ring, sounding as cheerful as if she'd just won the lottery. Hi, sweetheart. How are you feeling today? Mom, I said, grinning like an idiot. I just got a very interesting phone call from Tara. She seems to think you might have had something to do with her sudden financial difficulties. There was a pause, and then I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, my mother's laugh. Not her polite, social laugh, but her genuine, delighted, slightly wicked laugh. Did she now? Mom said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Well, that's very interesting. I suppose some people just have very bad luck. Mom, what did you do? Exactly what I said I would do, Julian. I fixed everything. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I believed her completely. You know that feeling when you're watching a really good revenge movie and the bad guy finally starts to get what's coming to them? That warm, fuzzy sensation that spreads through your chest like you've just had the perfect cup of coffee on a cold morning? Yeah, well, multiply that by about 1,000, and you'll have some idea of how I felt after hanging up on Tara's pathetic sob story. For the first time in days, I actually felt human again. I took a shower, a real one, with soap and everything, put on clean clothes, and even managed to eat something that didn't come out of a cereal box. It was like Mom's mysterious revenge plot had somehow restored my will to live, which is probably not the healthiest way to process trauma. But hey, I wasn't complaining. I kept thinking about Tara's voice, how it had cracked when she talked about Brandon disappearing. Part of me wondered what kind of guy just abandoned someone in a strange city with no money. But then I remembered that we were talking about a man who helps married women steal retirement funds from their elderly mothers-in-law. So really, abandoning people was probably just Tuesday for a scumbag like that. The more I thought about it, the more impressed I became with whatever Mom had pulled off. Freezing credit cards was one thing. Banks did that all the time for suspicious activity, but crypto wallets? That took some serious technical know-how, and my mother still asked me to help her update her iPhone every time Apple released a new version. I was so caught up in trying to figure out Mom's master plan that I almost didn't notice my phone buzzing again. Different number this time, but the area code was definitely Miami. Against my better judgment, and probably my mental health, I answered. Julian. Tara's voice was even more desperate than before, if that was possible. She sounded like she'd been crying for hours, with that thick, congested tone that comes from a complete emotional breakdown. Thank God you picked up. I borrowed this phone from someone at a coffee shop. My phone died, and I can't even afford to charge it. Let me guess, I said, settling back into my couch like I was getting ready to watch the season finale of my favorite TV show. Things have gotten worse since we last talked? You have no idea. She was trying to whisper, but I could still hear the desperation bleeding through every word. Brandon didn't just leave me, Julian. He took everything. The jewelry, the designer clothes we bought, even the cash I had in my purse. When I woke up this morning, he was just gone, like he'd never existed. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Wow, Tara. It's almost like you can't trust people who help you steal money from innocent old ladies. Who could have seen that coming? This isn't funny. I'm stranded here with literally nothing. I spent the last 2 hours trying to get someone to help me, but every single account is frozen. Even my PayPal, my Venmo, everything. It's like someone went through my entire financial life and just turned it off. The admiration I felt for Mom was growing by the minute. Whatever she'd done, it was thorough, surgically precise. The kind of complete financial destruction that probably took military-level planning and execution. Have you tried calling your parents? I asked, mostly because I was curious how far she'd fallen. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I can't. They don't know about Brandon. They think I'm at a work conference. If I call them now and tell them I need money because my husband's mother somehow destroyed my entire financial life after I stole her retirement fund. She trailed off, probably realizing how completely insane that story sounded. Yeah, that's a tough conversation, I agreed cheerfully. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to become a thief. Stop calling me that, she snapped, and for a second I heard a flash of the old Tara, the one who never thought she was wrong about anything. I'm not a thief. Brandon said it was just temporary, that we'd put everything back before anyone noticed. He had this investment opportunity, this sure thing that was going to make us rich, and all we needed was some startup capital. And you decided my mother's life savings would make excellent startup capital. I was actually enjoying this conversation now. Tell me, Tara, did it ever occur to you to ask me about this amazing investment opportunity? Or to use your own money? Or maybe, I don't know, not steal from the woman who raised me? She started crying again, those ugly, desperate sobs that sounded like they were being torn out of her chest. I never meant for it to go this far. When Brandon first suggested it, I said no. But then he showed me all these articles about people who made millions from cryptocurrency. And he said if we didn't act fast, we'd miss our chance forever. So you decided to gamble with money that wasn't yours. I thought we'd have it back before she ever knew. Brandon said it would only take a few weeks, maybe a month at most. We were going to surprise her with even more money than we took. The delusion was breathtaking. Even now, even after everything had fallen apart, she was still trying to convince herself, and me, that she'd had good intentions. Like stealing was somehow noble if you planned to give the money back eventually. Tara, I said, and my voice was probably colder than it had ever been. Do you hear yourself right now? You're talking about my mother's retirement fund like it was some kind of casino chip. That money represents 30 years of her life. 30 years of working double shifts and clipping coupons and denying herself things she wanted so she could have security in her old age. And you threw it all away on some get-rich-quick scheme because your boyfriend had a sure thing. But your mother's smart. She must have more money saved somewhere else, right? She's always seemed so put together, so prepared for everything. Stop. I cut her off before she could finish that thought. Just stop talking. You don't get to make assumptions about my mother's finances, especially after what you've done. And for the record, that retirement fund was everything she had. Everything. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out until I wondered if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was so small I could barely hear it. Julian, I know you hate me right now, and I deserve it. But I'm begging you, please don't let your mother do this to me. Whatever she's done, whatever she's planning, it's working. I'm completely destroyed. Isn't that enough? And that's when something clicked in my brain. The way she phrased it, whatever she's planning. Like she knew this was just the beginning. Like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Tara, I said slowly, what makes you think Mom is planning something else? Another pause, longer this time. When she answered, her voice was shaking. Because this morning, before Brandon left, he got a phone call. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard him say your mother's name. And then he just panicked. Started throwing things in his bag, talking about how he had to get out of town immediately. He looked scared, Julian. Really scared. My smile was probably visible from space. Scared of my mom? The woman who bakes cookies for the neighborhood kids and volunteers at the animal shelter? There's something you don't know about her, Tara whispered. Something Brandon figured out. Before he left, he told me to warn you. He said your mother isn't who you think she is, and that she's not going to stop until she's completely destroyed both of us. I laughed. Actually laughed, because the idea of Brandon being afraid of my sweet, 60-year-old mother was the most ridiculous thing I'd heard all week. Tara, I think your boyfriend's just a coward who realized he picked the wrong family to mess with. Julian, please. You know what? I hope Mom isn't done with you yet. I hope whatever she's planning next makes what's already happened look like a gentle warning. Because you deserve every bit of misery that's coming your way. How can you say that? I'm your wife. No, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. You're a stranger who happened to be married to me. My wife wouldn't have betrayed my family. My wife wouldn't have stolen from my mother. My wife wouldn't be calling me from Miami asking for help after running off with another man. I could hear her crying again, but this time it didn't move me at all. This is your life now, Tara. Figure it out. And for the second time that day, I hung up on her. But this time, I immediately called Mom back. Hi, sweetheart, she answered, and she sounded absolutely delighted. How was your day? Mom, I said, grinning like an idiot. I think I'm starting to understand why Brandon ran away. Her laugh was music to my ears. Oh, did he now? How interesting. What happens next? Well, she said thoughtfully, I suppose that depends on whether they've learned their lesson yet. Something told me the lesson was just getting started. I don't think I'd ever driven to Mom's house faster in my life. I'm pretty sure I broke at least 3 traffic laws and definitely ignored a few stop signs. But I needed answers, and I needed them now. The curiosity was eating me alive like some kind of intellectual parasite. How does a 60-year-old retired librarian completely destroy 2 people's financial lives in less than 48 hours? And more importantly, why was I only now realizing that my sweet, cookie-baking mother might actually be some kind of criminal mastermind? When I pulled into her driveway, I noticed she was sitting on the front porch with a cup of tea and what looked like a manila folder in her lap. She waved at me like we'd planned this little visit, which, knowing what I know now about my mother's planning abilities, we probably had without me realizing it. Perfect timing, sweetheart, she called out as I practically jogged up the walkway. I was just thinking it was time for you to see exactly what we're dealing with. I plopped down in the chair next to her, the same one I'd sat in as a kid when she'd lecture me about tracking mud through the house or forgetting to take out the trash. But this time, instead of getting a talking to about my failures as a son, I was apparently getting a briefing on her skills as a revenge artist. Mom, I said, trying to catch my breath. I need you to explain to me how you managed to turn Tara and Brandon's life into a dumpster fire in 2 days. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you somehow acquired superpowers, and I'm feeling really stupid for not noticing sooner. She laughed that delighted little laugh again and handed me the manila folder. Open it, she said, settling back in her chair like she was about to watch her favorite movie. I opened the folder and immediately felt my brain try to process what I was seeing. Bank statements, printed emails, screenshots of text messages, recorded phone calls transcribed onto paper, and what looked like a small stack of legal documents. Everything was organized with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. Mom, what is all this? Evidence, she said simply, taking a sip of her tea. I've been collecting it for about 3 months now. I looked up from the papers, my jaw probably hanging somewhere around my ankles. 3 months? You knew about this for 3 months and didn't tell me. She nodded, completely unbothered by my shock. I suspected something was wrong when Tara started asking so many questions about my finances. Innocent questions at first, how much I had saved, where I kept my accounts, whether I'd ever considered investing in anything more exciting than CDs and savings bonds. Most people would have thought she was just being helpful, showing interest in my financial well-being. But you didn't think that. Julian, I've been managing money since before you were born. I've dealt with every type of financial predator you can imagine, from smooth-talking investment advisors to those scam artists who call pretending to be from the IRS. I know what genuine concern looks like, and I know what phishing expeditions look like. Tara was definitely phishing. I started flipping through the documents, and with each page, my respect for my mother grew exponentially. She had screenshots of text messages between Tara and Brandon dating back months. Transcripts of phone calls where they discussed the old lady's money and how easy it would be to access. Even printed emails where they researched luxury resorts and discussed how to make the theft look like a legitimate withdrawal. How did you get all this? I asked, holding up a particularly damning text thread where Tara called me clueless and Brandon referred to Mom as the perfect mark. Well, Mom said, and for the first time, she looked slightly sheepish. Remember when I asked you to help me set up that new phone last year? The one with all the modern features. Yeah, you said you wanted to be able to video chat with me and send pictures. I did want those things, but I also wanted the ability to monitor certain activities. When Tara helped me set up my online banking, she insisted on using my phone to verify everything. What she didn't realize was that my new phone automatically backs up everything to the cloud, including any apps that get installed or used. I stared at her, slowly piecing together what she was telling me. You mean, every time she logged into my account from her phone, my phone got a notification. Every text she sent about her plans, every call she made to Brandon about stealing my money, every Google search about how to transfer large sums without triggering bank alerts. My phone was quietly saving copies of everything. The woman was absolutely diabolical. But how did you know to look for this stuff? Mom set down her tea and looked at me with the same expression she used to wear when she was teaching me how to ride a bike or tie my shoes. Patient, but determined to make sure I understood the lesson. Julian, I didn't work at the library for 30 years just stamping books and shushing teenagers. I was the head of research services. Do you know what that means? I shook my head, suddenly realizing I knew a lot less about my mother's career than I'd thought. It means that when people came to me with complex questions, lawyers researching case law, graduate students tracking down obscure sources, police officers looking for background information on suspects, I was the one who found the answers. I learned how to dig through databases, how to cross-reference information, how to spot patterns that other people missed. And more importantly, I learned how to be patient and thorough. She reached over and pointed to one of the documents in my lap, a bank statement with several transactions highlighted in yellow. 3 months ago, I noticed some unusual activity on my accounts. Nothing major, just small test withdrawals, $5 here, $10 there. The kind of thing most people would dismiss as bank fees or automatic payments. But I knew I hadn't authorized any of those transactions. So you started investigating. I started documenting everything. Every strange question Tara asked, every time she offered to help with my finances, every time she seemed unusually interested in my banking information. And slowly, a pattern emerged. I flipped to another page and found myself looking at a detailed timeline of events, complete with dates, times, and cross-references to supporting evidence. It was like something out of a crime drama, except it was my real life and my mother was apparently Sherlock Holmes. But this is just documentation, I said, gesturing to the folder. How did you actually stop them? How did you freeze their accounts and make Brandon run away scared? Mom's smile turned absolutely wicked. That's where it gets interesting. You see, while I was collecting evidence of their plans, I was also making some plans of my own. Did you know that your cousin Jessica works for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division? I blinked. Jessica? The one who always brings potato salad to family reunions. The very same. Turns out, she's also a specialist in tracking cybercriminals and money laundering schemes. When I showed her what I discovered about Tara and Brandon's little operation, she was very interested. Apparently, this Brandon character has been running similar scams in 3 other states. My brain was struggling to keep up. So you reported them to the FBI? I shared my research with the appropriate authorities, Mom said primly. What happened after that was simply justice taking its course. But the frozen accounts, the crypto wallet, all of that happened so fast. Julian, she interrupted gently. When you have documented evidence of premeditated financial fraud, federal agencies can move very quickly, especially when the suspects are actively fleeing the state with stolen money. I sat back in my chair, completely overwhelmed. My sweet, Quiet Mother had basically run a 3-month undercover investigation, built a bulletproof case against my wife and her boyfriend, and then watched them walk right into a federal trap. "Mom," I said finally, "you're absolutely terrifying." She laughed and patted my knee. "Only to people who try to hurt my family, sweetheart. Is there anything else I should know about this master plan of yours?" She picked up her tea again and took a thoughtful sip. "Well, there might be a few more surprises in store for them. After all, they did steal from me, and I do believe in being thorough." I looked down at the folder in my lap, filled with evidence of my mother's incredible patience and planning, and realized that Tara and Brandon had made the biggest mistake of their lives. They hadn't just stolen money from a sweet old lady. They'd stolen from a woman who spent 3 decades teaching people how to find the truth, no matter how well it was hidden. And now they were about to learn exactly what that meant. After seeing Mom's evidence folder, I thought I had a pretty good handle on the situation. Tara and Brandon had been caught red-handed by a retired librarian with FBI connections, and now they were paying the price for underestimating a woman who could probably organize a military coup using nothing but index cards and color-coded filing systems. But as it turns out, I'd only seen the tip of the iceberg, and my mother was just getting warmed up. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," Mom said the next morning when she called and asked me to come over. "She's been very helpful with our little situation." When I arrived at Mom's house, there was an unfamiliar car in the driveway, a sleek black sedan that screamed "government official" so loudly I was surprised it didn't have flashing lights and a siren. I found Mom in the kitchen with a woman who looked like she could bench press a refrigerator and then interrogate it for information. "Julian," Mom said cheerfully, "this is Detective Marla Quinn." "Marla, this is my son, the one I told you about." Detective Quinn stood up and shook my hand with a grip that could probably crack walnuts. She was maybe 40, with short gray hair and the kind of direct stare that made you want to confess to crimes you hadn't even committed. When she smiled, it was the smile of someone who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Your mother's told me a lot about you," she said, "and about your wife's unfortunate career change into financial fraud." I sat down at the kitchen table, feeling like I had walked into some kind of law enforcement briefing. "So you're working on Tara and Brandon's case?" "Working on it." Detective Quinn laughed, and it sounded like gravel being processed in a cement mixer. "Son, we've been building a case against Brandon Cole for 6 months. Your mother just handed us the missing pieces on a silver platter." Mom set a cup of coffee in front of me and settled into her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just solved a particularly challenging crossword puzzle. "Tell him about the task force, Marla. I head up a multi-state financial crimes unit," Quinn explained, pulling out a tablet and swiping through what looked like mugshots and case files. "We've been tracking Brandon and his associates for almost a year. He's been running romance scams and theft operations across 5 states, targeting older women specifically." She turned the tablet toward me, and I found myself looking at a gallery of Brandon's victims. Elderly women, mostly, with sad stories about lost retirement funds and broken trust. The amounts varied. Sometimes it was a few thousand, sometimes it was everything they had, but the pattern was always the same. Charming boyfriend convinces trusting woman to invest her money, then disappears with everything. The problem was proving premeditation, Quinn continued. Brandon's good at covering his tracks, and most of his victims are too embarrassed to come forward with solid evidence. "But your mother," she shook her head with something that looked like admiration. "Your mother documented everything. Phone calls, text messages, bank records, even GPS data from when they scouted locations together." I looked at Mom, who was sipping her coffee like we were discussing the weather. "GPS data?" "Well," Mom said modestly, "I did mention that I got a new phone with all the modern features. The location tracking has been very useful for establishing patterns of behavior." Detective Quinn laughed again. "Yvonne, you missed your calling. You should have been working for us instead of the library." "Oh, but I did work for you," Mom said with a twinkle in her eye. "Didn't I mention? I've been a volunteer consultant for the county sheriff's department for 15 years. I help with research for cold cases and missing persons investigations." I nearly choked on my coffee. "What? Since when?" "Since you went to college and I had all that free time on my hands," Mom said matter-of-factly. "I needed a hobby that used my research skills, and the sheriff's department needed someone who knew how to dig through old records and connect dots that other people missed. Detective Quinn nodded. Your mother's helped us solve 12 cold cases in the past decade. She's legendary in law enforcement circles around here. I stared at my mother, this woman I thought I knew, who was apparently some kind of civilian superhero with a talent for bringing criminals to justice. Is there anything else about your secret life that I should know about? Well, Mom said thoughtfully, there is the matter of how we caught them in the act. Quinn leaned forward with the expression of someone about to share a particularly good story. This is the best part. Yvonne didn't just wait for them to steal the money. She set them up. Set them up how? Mom pulled out her phone and showed me a banking app. I reported the suspicious activity to the bank 3 days before they made their move. Told them I suspected someone was planning to access my account fraudulently and asked them to flag any large withdrawals for immediate investigation. So when Tara transferred the money, the bank froze the transaction within hours and alerted the authorities. Quinn finished. We had them under surveillance before they even left the state. I felt like I was living in some kind of alternate reality where my mild-mannered mother was actually running covert operations from her kitchen table. But Tara said they spent money in Miami. How did they have access to anything if the accounts were frozen? Mom's smile turned absolutely predatory. Oh, they had access to some money. Just not my money. Quinn pulled up another screen on her tablet. We set up dummy accounts with fake funds. Let them think they were living it up on stolen money while we tracked every transaction, every location, every person they contacted. Brandon's been making calls to his associates, trying to set up his next scam. We now have enough evidence to take down his entire operation. So the luxury hotel, the designer shopping, all of that was bait, Mom said cheerfully. We wanted them to feel confident, to think they'd gotten away with it. Makes people sloppy when they think they're winning. Detective Quinn stood up and started packing her tablet away. The arrests are happening tomorrow morning. Brandon's been located at a hotel in Tampa, and we'll be picking up Tara when she tries to board her flight back home. Flight back home? I asked. She told me she was stranded with no money. Another lie, Quinn said. She booked a return ticket 2 hours ago using a credit card we've been monitoring. Probably figured she'd come back, play the victim, and convince you to help her out of this mess. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after everything that had happened, Tara was still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Still trying to play the innocent victim of circumstances beyond her control. What happens now? I asked. Now, Detective Quinn said, they both get arrested for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit theft. Federal charges, which means federal prison if they're convicted. And with the evidence your mother collected, conviction is pretty much guaranteed. She headed toward the door, then turned back with a grin. Oh, and Julian, you might want to start shopping for a good divorce lawyer. Something tells me your marriage is about to become legally complicated. After she left, I sat in Mom's kitchen trying to process everything I'd learned. My wife was about to be arrested by federal agents. My mother was apparently a volunteer crime-fighting consultant with friends in law enforcement. And the sweet, quiet woman who raised me had just orchestrated one of the most thorough takedowns of a criminal operation I'd ever heard of. Mom, I said finally, remind me never to get on your bad side. She laughed and patted my hand. Oh, sweetheart, you never have to worry about that. I only use my powers for good. And what exactly do you consider good? Her expression turned serious for a moment. Protecting the people I love. Making sure that those who hurt innocent people face consequences for their actions. And ensuring that my son never has to worry about his mother's financial security again. She was right about that last part. Looking at the woman sitting across from me, this brilliant, patient, absolutely terrifying woman who'd spent 3 months building an unbreakable case against the people who'd tried to destroy our family. I was pretty sure nobody would ever be stupid enough to mess with Yvonne Rivers again. And if they were, well, they'd quickly learn that some sweet old ladies bite back. The next morning, I was sitting in my kitchen trying to pretend that my life hadn't turned into some kind of crime drama when my phone rang. I'd been expecting this call. Detective Quinn had mentioned that Tara would probably try one last desperate attempt to manipulate me before the arrests went down, but I still felt my stomach clench when her name popped up on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let her go to voicemail, to avoid the inevitable sob story and manipulation tactics that were about to come pouring through my phone like toxic waste from a broken pipe. But the other part of me, the part that was apparently developing a taste for watching karma in action, was curious to see just how low she'd sink when she realized the walls were closing in. "Hello, Tara," I answered, going for a tone that was somewhere between bored and mildly annoyed. "Julian." Her voice was different this time. Not just desperate, but panicked in a way that made it clear she knew something was seriously wrong. "Thank God you answered. I need to talk to you. I need to explain everything." "Explain what exactly?" "How you stole my mother's retirement fund to go on vacation with your boyfriend. How you lied to my face for months while planning to destroy my family. I'm pretty sure I understand the situation just fine." "No, you don't understand." The words came out in a rush, like she was afraid I'd hang up before she could get them out. "Brandon lied to me about everything. He told me this was all going to be temporary, that we were just borrowing the money for a few weeks while his big investment deal went through. I never meant for any of this to happen." I leaned back in my chair and tried to decide whether I was more amused or disgusted by her attempt to rewrite history. "So you're saying you accidentally stole $120,000 from my mother? You accidentally helped plan a romantic getaway to Miami? You accidentally packed a suitcase and bought plane tickets and charged thousands of dollars to luxury hotels?" "It wasn't like that. Brandon said he had connections, that he could triple the money in just a few weeks. He showed me all these documents, these investment portfolios that looked completely legitimate. I thought I was helping secure our future." The delusion was breathtaking. Even now, even after her criminal boyfriend had abandoned her in a strange city with nothing, she was still trying to paint herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. "Tara," I said, and I was honestly impressed by how calm my voice sounded. "Do you hear yourself right now? You're talking about gambling with stolen money like it was some kind of noble sacrifice for our marriage. That wasn't your money to invest. It wasn't your risk to take. It was my mother's life savings, and you stole it." "Please, Julian, just listen to me." She was crying now, those desperate, hiccuping sobs that sounded like they were being torn out of her chest. "I know I made terrible mistakes, but I swear to you, I didn't know Brandon was a con artist. I thought I was married to a man who loved me, who wanted to build a life with me. When he told me about this opportunity, I believed him because I trusted him. And what about me? Did you trust me enough to talk to me about any of this before you decided to commit felony theft?" There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was so small I could barely hear it. "I was afraid you'd say no." Of course I would have said no. Any sane person would have said no. You don't steal money from elderly relatives to fund get-rich-quick schemes with your side piece. "He wasn't my side piece," she snapped, and for a second I heard a flash of the old Tara, the one who could never admit she was wrong about anything. "I love him, Julian. I know that hurts you, but it's the truth. I fell in love with someone who understood me, who made me feel alive in ways that you never did." There it was, the real truth, finally bubbling up through all the lies and excuses and attempts at manipulation. She hadn't just stolen money. She'd been having an affair, probably for months, and had convinced herself that her feelings justified everything she'd done. "Well," I said, and I was surprised by how little that confession actually hurt. "At least now you're being honest about something. So tell me, Tara, how's that working out for you? How alive do you feel now that your true love has abandoned you in Miami with federal agents closing in?" "Federal agents?" The panic in her voice ratcheted up another notch. "What are you talking about?" I probably should have kept my mouth shut, but the satisfaction was too sweet to resist. "Oh, did I forget to mention that? The FBI has been tracking your boyfriend for months. Turns out, stealing retirement funds from old ladies is kind of his specialty. Congratulations, you fell in love with a career criminal." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete, I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You're lying." "Am I? Then how do you explain the frozen accounts, the blocked credit cards, the fact that Brandon ran away the minute things got complicated? You think that was all just bad luck?" "Julian, please." The desperation was back, stronger than ever. "I'll pay it back. I'll get a job. I'll sell everything I own. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Please don't let your mother destroy me. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can work through it together." And that's when I completely lost it. Not in a screaming, throwing things kind of way, but in that cold, quiet way that happens when someone's audacity finally pushes you past your breaking point. "Let my mother destroy you?" I repeated slowly. "Tara, my mother didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself the minute you decided that your happiness was more important than her security. You destroyed yourself when you chose to betray the people who loved and trusted you. My mother just made sure you faced the consequences. But I love you, she cried, playing her last desperate card. I know I messed up, but underneath all the mistakes, I still love you. Doesn't that count for something? I thought about that for a second, really considered whether there was any part of me that still cared about the woman I'd married, the woman I'd shared a life with for 3 years. But all I could think about was my mother sitting calmly at her kitchen table, telling me she'd fixed everything, while Tara was living it up in Miami on stolen money. You want to know what counts? I said finally. What counts is that when the chips were down, when you had to choose between doing the right thing and doing the selfish thing, you chose selfishness every single time. What counts is that you looked at my 60-year-old mother and saw nothing but an easy mark. What counts is that you're calling me now not because you're sorry, but because you're scared and you want me to save you from the consequences of your own actions. Julian, I'm not done. My voice was getting colder by the second. What really counts is that while you were lying to my face and planning to steal from my family, my mother was quietly building a case against you. She knew what you were before I did, and she protected all of us in ways I'm still discovering. So no, Tara, your love doesn't count for anything. Not anymore. The crying got worse. Those ugly, desperate sobs that might have moved me a week ago, but now just sounded like the soundtrack to someone reaping what they'd sown. That's when I heard footsteps in the background of her call, and Mom's voice came on the line, calm and sweet as honey over broken glass. Hello, Tara, Mom said, and I could practically see her sitting in her chair with that serene smile. I thought it was time we had a little chat. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a federal courthouse that looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted to make sure everyone felt appropriately intimidated by the weight of justice. The kind of place where the marble floors echoed every footstep like a judge's gavel, and the high ceilings made you feel about as significant as a dust mite in a cathedral. Mom sat next to me in the gallery, wearing her best church dress and looking like she was attending a particularly satisfying book club meeting rather than watching her daughter-in-law get arraigned on federal fraud charges. She'd brought a small purse that probably contained enough evidence to convict half the criminals in the state, and she kept checking her watch like she had somewhere important to be after watching my marriage officially die in federal court. Nervous, I whispered to her as we waited for the proceedings to begin. "Oh no, sweetheart," she whispered back with that sweet smile that I now knew could be absolutely terrifying in the right circumstances. "I've been looking forward to this all week." Detective Quinn had given us a preview of what to expect, but seeing it play out in real time was something else entirely. Brandon was brought in first, looking like he'd aged about 10 years in the 3 weeks since his arrest. Gone was the smooth, confident con man who'd charmed my wife into committing felonies. This guy looked like he'd been sleeping in his clothes and surviving on gas station coffee and regret. He kept glancing around the courtroom with the desperate expression of someone looking for an exit that didn't exist. When his eyes landed on Mom, I swear I saw him actually flinch. Apparently, word had gotten around the federal detention center that the sweet old lady in the front row was the mastermind behind his downfall. Then they brought in Tara, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. She looked absolutely terrible, not in a tragic, sympathetic way, but in the specific way that happens when someone realizes their life choices have finally caught up with them. Her hair was a mess, her orange jumpsuit was about 3 sizes too big, and she had the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd spent the last few weeks trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. When she saw me in the gallery, her face lit up with hope that was painful to watch. She mouthed, "Julian, help me," like I was going to leap over the barrier, declare that this was all a big misunderstanding, and somehow make the federal government disappear. Instead, I just stared at her until she looked away. The judge was a woman in her 60s who had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd been dealing with criminals and their excuses for longer than I'd been alive. Judge Patricia Morrison, according to the nameplate on her bench, and she looked like she could sentence someone to 20 years in prison and then go home to bake cookies for her grandchildren without missing a beat. "The United States versus Brandon Cole and Tara Henderson," she announced, and the formal sound of it made everything feel suddenly, brutally real. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was federal court, where people's lives got decided by laws and evidence, and the kind of justice that didn't care about your feelings or your sob story. The prosecutor was a sharp-dressed woman who looked like she ate defense attorneys for breakfast and had Brandon and Tara's case memorized down to the last bank transaction. She laid out the charges with the kind of clinical precision that made it clear this wasn't her first rodeo with financial fraud cases. Your Honor, the defendants stand accused of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and theft of funds from a federally insured institution. The evidence will show that Mr. Cole and Mrs. Henderson engaged in a months-long scheme to defraud Mrs. Yvonne Rivers of her retirement savings, using sophisticated methods to gain access to her accounts and transfer funds across state lines for personal use. Brandon's lawyer, a tired-looking public defender who probably had about 15 other cases to worry about, tried to argue that his client was just a small-time operator who got in over his head. Tara's lawyer, meanwhile, was clearly going for the innocent wife led astray by a manipulative criminal defense. Your Honor, Tara's attorney said, my client is a victim here as much as anyone. She was manipulated by Mr. Cole into believing this was a legitimate investment opportunity. She never intended to permanently deprive Mrs. Rivers of her funds. That's when Mom stood up in the gallery. Not dramatically, not making a scene, just rising from her seat with the calm authority of someone who had something important to say. Your Honor, she said, and her voice carried clearly through the courtroom. May I address the court? Judge Morrison looked at her over her reading glasses. Are you Mrs. Rivers, the victim in this case? I am, Your Honor. You may speak. Mom walked to the front of the courtroom with the same measured pace she'd used when walking down the aisle at my wedding, back when I thought I was marrying someone who wouldn't steal from my family. She turned to face the judge, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. Your Honor, I'd like to submit some additional evidence for the court's consideration. She opened her purse and pulled out a folder, not the one she'd shown me, but a different one, thicker and more official looking. These are recordings of phone conversations between the defendants, made with the knowledge and assistance of federal investigators. They clearly demonstrate premeditation and intent to defraud. She handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. As Judge Morrison flipped through the contents, her eyebrows gradually climbed toward her hairline. Mrs. Rivers, the judge said finally, this is quite comprehensive. How did you come by this evidence? I suspected something was wrong and began documenting everything, Your Honor. When it became clear that my daughter-in-law and her accomplice were planning to steal my retirement savings, I contacted the appropriate authorities and assisted in their investigation. Tara's lawyer looked like someone had just told him his client was actually guilty of everything she'd been accused of and worse. Brandon's lawyer started shuffling through papers like he was looking for a miracle hidden somewhere in his legal briefs. Judge Morrison looked down at Tara, who was now crying silently in her orange jumpsuit. Mrs. Henderson, having reviewed this evidence, I'm particularly interested in a phone conversation from 2 months ago where you referred to Mrs. Rivers as the perfect mark and discussed how easy it would be to clean out the old lady's accounts. Would you care to explain that? Tara looked up at the judge with tears streaming down her face. Your Honor, I was angry about something else, and I said things I didn't mean. I never actually intended. Mrs. Henderson, Judge Morrison interrupted. I've been on this bench for 22 years, and I've heard every excuse imaginable. What I haven't often seen is evidence this thorough and damning. The recordings make it clear that both you and Mr. Cole planned this theft for months, that you researched methods to avoid detection, and that you showed absolutely no remorse for targeting an elderly woman's life savings. She turned to Brandon, who was slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. Mr. Cole, I see from your record that this isn't your first time targeting elderly victims. In fact, this appears to be your primary method of income. The court is particularly disturbed by the pattern of behavior demonstrated here. The sentencing was swift and brutal. Brandon got 8 years in federal prison, which the judge noted was on the lenient side considering his prior record and the vulnerability of his victims. Tara got 5 years, with the possibility of parole after 3 if she made full restitution to Mom and cooperated with ongoing investigations into Brandon's other victims. As they led Tara away in handcuffs, she turned back to look at me one more time. Her mouth moved like she was trying to say something, but no sound came out. I just sat there and watched the woman I'd married disappear through a door that led to a federal prison and felt absolutely nothing except relief that it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, Mom linked her arm through mine as we walked down the marble steps into the afternoon sunlight. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I need a very large drink and a very long nap," I said honestly. "And like I owe you the biggest apology in the history of apologies for not seeing what she was before you did." Mom patted my arm with that same gentle touch she'd used when I was a kid and had scraped my knee or broken my favorite toy. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "you don't owe me any apologies. You loved someone and trusted them. That's not a character flaw. It's what good people do. The fault lies entirely with the person who chose to betray that trust." As we reached her car, I realized that for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The nightmare was over. The criminals were going to prison, and my mother's retirement fund was not only restored but earning interest while the government sorted out the details of asset forfeiture. "So what happens now?" I asked. Mom smiled and pulled her car keys out of her purse. Now we go home, and I make you dinner, and we start figuring out what the rest of your life is going to look like." "And what about you? What does your life look like now?" Her smile turned absolutely radiant. "Like exactly what I always planned it would be, sweetheart. Peaceful, secure, and surrounded by people who actually deserve my trust." As we drove away from the courthouse, I couldn't help but think that Tara and Brandon had made the worst possible choice when they decided to target my family. They'd underestimated a woman who spent her entire career hunting down the truth, and now they were going to spend the next few years learning exactly what that mistake cost them. Justice, I realized, looked a lot like my mother: patient, thorough, and absolutely inevitable. 6 months after the courtroom drama that officially ended my marriage and sent my ex-wife to federal prison, I pulled into the driveway of what could only be described as Mom's dream house. Gone was the modest little place where I'd grown up, with its creaky floors and outdated kitchen. In its place sat a gorgeous lakeside cottage that looked like something out of a home and garden magazine, complete with wraparound porches and flower boxes that were probably organized by color and blooming schedule. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tara's attempt to steal Mom's retirement had actually resulted in Mom getting the retirement of her dreams. Between the asset forfeiture from Brandon's criminal enterprise, the settlement from the bank's insurance company for failing to catch the fraud sooner, and some kind of victims' compensation fund that Detective Quinn had helped her navigate, Mom's nest egg had tripled in size. She'd gone from comfortable retirement to buy a lakeside cottage and still have money left over for a boat retirement. I found her in the back garden, wearing a sun hat that looked suspiciously expensive and supervising what appeared to be a professional landscaping crew. She waved me over with the enthusiasm of someone who was living her absolute best life. "Julian, perfect timing," she called out. "I'm trying to decide between the lavender or the rosemary for this corner bed. What do you think?" I looked at the corner in question, which already looked like something that belonged in Better Homes and Gardens, and tried to imagine having such pleasant problems to worry about. "Honestly, Mom, I think either one would look amazing. This whole place looks amazing." She beamed at me with the kind of pure joy that made me realize how much stress she'd been carrying before this whole situation got resolved. I'd gotten so used to thinking of her as indestructible that I'd forgotten she was human, and that having her life savings stolen, even temporarily, had probably scared her more than she'd ever let on. "Come on," she said, linking her arm through mine. "Let me give you the full tour. I want to show you what justice looks like when it's properly landscaped." The house was everything Mom had ever wanted but never thought she could afford. Hardwood floors that gleamed like they'd been polished by angels, a kitchen with enough counter space to host a cooking show, and windows that faced the lake so she could watch the sunset every evening while drinking her tea. It was the kind of place that made you want to retire immediately, even if you were only 32 and had no idea what you'd do with yourself. "The guest room is ready whenever you want to visit," she said, opening the door to a bedroom that was bigger than my current living room. "I know you're still figuring out what you want to do about the house you shared with her." She still couldn't bring herself to say Tara's name, which I found oddly endearing. It was like Mom had decided that people who steal from families don't deserve the dignity of being referred to by name. They just become that person or her, or, when Mom was feeling particularly spicy, the criminal. "Actually," I said, sitting down on the window seat that overlooked the lake, I wanted to talk to you about that. I've been thinking about selling the house and maybe moving somewhere new. Starting fresh, you know. Mom settled into the chair across from me, and I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner. A gray tabby cat who was watching me with the suspicious expression of someone who wasn't sure if I was worthy of his newly luxurious lifestyle. That's Jasper, Mom said, following my gaze. I adopted him from the shelter last month. The volunteers said he'd been returned 3 times because he's too independent and judgmental. I told them he sounded perfect. I laughed, because of course my mother would adopt a cat with trust issues and attitude problems. He fits right in with your new security system, I'm guessing. Oh, you noticed that? Mom's eyes twinkled with mischief. Your cousin Theo installed it last week. Motion sensors, cameras, alarms that connect directly to the sheriff's department. Theo said it was probably overkill for an elderly woman living alone. But I told him that elderly women who bring down federal crime rings might have different security needs than your average retiree. I shook my head in amazement. Even now, even after everything that had happened, Mom was still planning 3 steps ahead. You really think Brandon's associates might come after you? Oh, probably not, she said casually, like we were discussing the possibility of rain. Detective Quinn says most of them are too busy dealing with their own legal problems to worry about revenge. But I've learned that it's better to be prepared for trouble than to be surprised by it. She got up and walked to the window, looking out at the lake where a family of ducks was paddling around like they didn't have a care in the world. Besides, Theo needed a project, and I needed to feel completely secure in my new home. It worked out perfectly. Speaking of working out perfectly, I said, how are you adjusting to all this? The new house, the money, the fact that you're apparently famous in law enforcement circles now. Mom laughed and came back to sit down, with Jasper immediately jumping into her lap like he'd been waiting for permission. Well, the detective who arrested Brandon called me last week. Turns out, 3 other families want to thank me personally for helping catch him. Apparently, he'd been targeting their relatives too, and my evidence helped them get justice for their loved ones as well. So you're like a hero to multiple families now. I prefer to think of myself as someone who was in the right place at the right time with the right skills, she said modestly, scratching behind Jasper's ears. Though I did get a very nice letter from the FBI thanking me for my exceptional civilian assistance in bringing down a multi-state criminal operation. I'm thinking about framing it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the ducks and listening to Jasper purr like a tiny, judgmental motor. It occurred to me that this was the most relaxed I'd seen Mom in years, not just since the Tara situation, but in years. Like she'd finally gotten to the place in life where she could just be herself without worrying about taking care of everyone else. Mom, I said finally, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. She looked at me with that patient expression she'd perfected over 3 decades of answering my random questions. Of course, sweetheart. When you were collecting all that evidence, when you were working with Detective Quinn and setting up the sting operation, were you scared? Even a little bit. She was quiet for a long moment, stroking Jasper's fur and considering her answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. Not scared exactly. Angry, yes. Determined, absolutely. But scared. She shook her head. Julian, I've been taking care of myself and the people I love for a very long time. I raised you as a single mother. I worked my way up from part-time library assistant to head of research services. I've helped solve cold cases that stumped professional investigators. I learned a long time ago that the best way to deal with people who try to hurt you is to be smarter, more patient, and more thorough than they are. And if that doesn't work... Her smile turned absolutely wicked. Then you call in your friends from law enforcement and make sure they spend the next few years thinking about their life choices from a federal prison cell. I couldn't help but laugh. You know what's funny? Tara always used to complain that you were too quiet, too passive. She said you needed to stand up for yourself more. Well, Mom said with satisfaction, I suppose she learned that quiet doesn't mean weak. It just means patient. As the sun started to set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that looked like something from a postcard, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not dramatic or flashy, but peaceful, secure. A woman who'd worked hard her entire life finally getting to enjoy the fruits of her labor, surrounded by beauty and protected by the knowledge that justice had been served. I'm proud of you, Mom, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Not just for what you did to Tara and Brandon, but for building this life for yourself. For knowing exactly what you wanted and figuring out how to get it. She reached over and patted my hand, the same gesture she'd been making since I was a kid, but somehow it felt different now. More like an acknowledgement between equals than comfort from a mother to her child. Well, she said, I had a good teacher. What do you mean? You sweetheart. Watching you build your business, seeing you work so hard to create something meaningful, that taught me that it's never too late to go after what you really want. As I drove home that evening, past the lake that reflected the last light of the day like scattered diamonds, I couldn't help but think that maybe the best revenge wasn't just making sure bad people faced consequences. Maybe it was living so well, so fully, so completely on your own terms that their attempt to hurt you ended up being the best thing that ever happened to you. And if anyone ever doubted that justice was real, they just needed to look at my mother, sitting on her porch overlooking the lake, drinking tea with her judgmental rescue cat, completely secure in the knowledge that some people should never have messed with Yvonne Rivers. 1 year later, I found myself sitting on Mom's porch on a perfect Sunday afternoon, watching her tend to what she proudly called her Justice Garden, a collection of plants she'd named after everyone who'd helped bring down Tara and Brandon's criminal operation. There was Detective Quinn, a tough-as-nails rose bush, Cousin Theo, some kind of high-tech automated sprinkler system that probably cost more than my car, and Judge Morrison, a stately oak tree that looked like it could sentence lesser plants to community service. I'd moved into a new apartment across town, finally sold the house that held too many memories of my spectacularly failed marriage, and started dating again, carefully, and with the kind of background-checking skills that my mother had inadvertently taught me. Turns out, when your mom brings down federal crime rings in her spare time, you develop a healthy skepticism about people's motives and a talent for spotting red flags from 3 counties away. More tea, sweetheart? Mom asked, settling into her favorite porch chair with Jasper draped across her lap like a furry, judgmental scarf. The cat had fully embraced his role as lord of the lakeside manor and spent most of his time either sunbathing or glaring disapprovingly at boats that dared to disturb his view. Thanks, Mom, I said, accepting the cup and marveling at how completely normal this all felt now. A year ago, I'd been married to a woman who was planning to steal my mother's retirement fund. Now I was sitting in paradise, drinking tea with a woman who'd become something of a local legend in law enforcement circles, discussing whether the new neighbors were suspicious or just unfamiliar with proper dock etiquette. Did I tell you that Detective Quinn called yesterday? Mom said, scratching behind Jasper's ears and earning a purr that sounded like a tiny diesel engine. Apparently, Brandon's been trying to appeal his sentence, claiming that he was the victim of entrapment by an overly aggressive civilian consultant. I nearly choked on my tea. He's claiming you entrapped him? Can you imagine? Mom's laugh was absolutely delighted, as if I somehow forced him to steal retirement funds from elderly women. The judge apparently told his lawyer that if Mr. Cole felt entrapped by the consequences of his own criminal behavior, he should have considered a different career path. Please tell me Quinn recorded that conversation. Oh, she did better than that. She sent me a copy of the court transcript. I'm thinking about having it framed next to my FBI commendation letter. I shook my head in amazement. Even from federal prison, Brandon was still trying to blame other people for his choices. Some people, apparently, never learned. What about Tara? I asked, though I wasn't sure why I was curious. Maybe because it felt weird to have someone who'd been such a huge part of my life just disappear into the federal prison system without any closure. Mom's expression softened slightly, the way it did when she was trying to be diplomatic about someone who didn't deserve diplomacy. She's been writing letters. To you? To both of us. The prison forwards them to Detective Quinn first, for security reasons, and then Quinn asks if I want to read them. Mom sipped her tea thoughtfully. They're interesting. Interesting how? Well, the first few were apologies. Very dramatic, very tearful, full of remorse and promises to make amends. Then they became angry. Apparently, it's my fault that she's in prison because I overreacted to her temporary borrowing of my money. The most recent ones are philosophical. I raised an eyebrow. Philosophical. She's apparently found religion and wants to forgive me for destroying her life out of spite. Very generous of her, really. The audacity was breathtaking, even by Tara's standards. She wants to forgive you. For ruining her relationship with Brandon, for getting her arrested, for refusing to show Christian charity when she offered to pay me back with money she didn't have. Mom's smile turned predatory. I particularly enjoyed the letter where she explained that if I were a truly good person, I would have quietly absorbed the financial loss rather than seek worldly justice. Please tell me you're not actually reading these letters. Oh no, I stopped reading them months ago. But Quinn gives me the highlights during our monthly coffee dates. We've made it into a sort of drinking game. Every time Tara blames someone else for her problems, we take a sip of wine. How often are you and Detective Quinn drinking wine? Let's just say we've had to switch to smaller glasses. I laughed, because the image of my sweet mother and the tough-as-nails detective getting tipsy while reading my ex-wife's prison letters was almost too perfect. It was like the universe had decided that the best possible outcome of this whole mess was Mom gaining a new best friend who shared her appreciation for karmic justice. Have you written back to any of them? Just one, Mom said, and her tone suggested this was going to be good. About 6 months ago, she sent a particularly nasty letter claiming that I'd stolen her husband and destroyed her marriage out of jealousy because I was a bitter old woman who couldn't stand to see young people happy. And you responded to that. Mom reached into her purse and pulled out a copy of what looked like a very short letter. She handed it to me with the expression of someone sharing her finest work. The letter was typed on Mom's personal stationery, the fancy stuff with her name embossed at the top. And it was exactly 3 sentences long. Dear Tara, I didn't steal your husband. I simply made sure you faced the consequences of stealing from me. I hope this clarifies any confusion about who the victim is in this situation. Sincerely, Mrs. Yvonne Rivers. I stared at the letter, then at Mom, then back at the letter. This is the most politely savage thing I've ever read. I thought so too. Quinn framed her copy. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lake and enjoying the kind of peace that comes from knowing all your problems have been solved by superior planning and federal law enforcement. A boat puttered by in the distance, and Jasper opened one judgmental eye to assess whether it posed a threat to his kingdom before deciding it wasn't worth his attention. Mom, I said finally, can I ask you something that's been bothering me? Of course, sweetheart. How did you stay so calm through all of this? When you first realized what Tara was planning, when you were collecting evidence, even during the trial, you never seemed angry or upset. How did you manage that? She was quiet for a long moment, stroking Jasper's fur and watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. When she finally answered, her voice was thoughtful. I was angry, Julian. Angrier than I'd ever been in my life. But I learned a long time ago that anger is just energy, and energy can be channeled into something useful if you're patient enough to figure out how. What do you mean? I mean that I could have screamed and cried and demanded that you confront Tara immediately. I could have called the police right away and hoped they could build a case with whatever evidence they could scrape together. But none of that would have guaranteed justice. None of that would have ensured that she faced real consequences for what she was planning to do. She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. Not hardness, exactly, but an absolute, unshakable certainty about who she was and what she was capable of. So instead, I channeled that anger into patience, into planning, into making sure that when the hammer finally fell, it fell so completely that there would be no way for them to escape or manipulate their way out of the consequences. And if they hadn't walked into your trap, if they'd been smarter or more careful, her smile was absolutely terrifying in its sweetness. Oh, sweetheart, I had backup plans for my backup plans. Did you really think a woman who spent 30 years organizing information and solving puzzles would leave anything to chance? I believed her completely, looking at my mother. This woman who'd built herself a perfect retirement home with money that criminals had tried to steal, who'd gained a new best friend in law enforcement, who'd become something of a legend among FBI agents and federal prosecutors. I realized that Tara and Brandon had made the most catastrophic error in judgment possible. They'd looked at Yvonne Rivers and seen a sweet, quiet, vulnerable old lady who would be easy to take advantage of. What they'd actually found was a woman who'd spent decades developing the skills to track down hidden truths, the patience to wait for exactly the right moment to act, and the connections to make sure justice was not only served, but served with a side of federal prosecution and a dessert course of asset forfeiture. You know what the funniest part is? I said, leaning back in my chair and watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. What's that? Tara always used to say you were too trusting, too naive about how the world really worked. She thought you needed someone to protect you from people who might take advantage of your good nature. Mom's laugh echoed across the lake like music. Well, I suppose she learned that being kind doesn't mean being helpless, and that underestimating people can be a very expensive mistake. As the evening settled around us and the lake reflected the stars like scattered diamonds, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete, perfect contentment. Not the kind that comes from having everything you want, but the kind that comes from knowing that justice exists in the world, that good people can win when they're smart enough and patient enough, and that some mothers are exactly the kind of people you want on your side when life gets complicated. I love you, Mom, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I love you too, sweetheart, she replied, settling deeper into her chair with Jasper purring in her lap and the lake stretching out before us like a promise of peaceful tomorrows. And if anyone ever asked me whether justice was real, I'd just tell them about my mother, the woman who fixed everything, one perfectly planned move at a time.